Imagine throwing away a toy, only to have it return, not once but twice. A doll that wouldn't stay gone. What would you do? For one family in Houston, Texas, this wasn't just a creepy story, it was their reality. Meet Elsa, a doll from the movie Frozen, but not the kind you'd want to play with. Haunted dolls, just the thought sends chills down your spine. For most of us, the image that comes to mind is a dusty porcelain doll. Its cracked face frozen in a haunting expression, lifeless glass eyes following you wherever you go. These dolls are often relics of a bygone era, carrying with them an eerie sense of history and mystery. But this isn't one of those stories. This is about a modern toy. Not a relic from the past, but something mass-produced. A toy so ordinary that it could be found on store shelves in nearly every city across the globe. A Disney Frozen Elsa doll. It was supposed to be a gift that brought joy. Just another piece of merchandise tied to one of the biggest animated movies of all time. Children everywhere adored Elsa. She was a hero, a role model, a princess with magical powers who sang songs of independence and freedom. To many, she was unforgettable, but not like this. For one family in Houston, Texas, this doll became something much darker. What began as an innocent Christmas gift for their little girl turned into a strange, terrifying experience that left them questioning reality itself. At first, it was subtle, something they could brush off as a harmless glitch. But soon, the doll's behavior became impossible to ignore. It didn't just act strangely. It refused to go away. They tried to get rid of it. Not once, not twice, but multiple times, and yet, somehow, Elsa always found a way back. How? Why? What made this seemingly ordinary doll so unexplainable? And how did it manage to return again and again? This isn't just a story about a toy. It's a story about a mystery that no one has been able to solve. Christmas morning, 2013. Like millions of other families around the world, the Madonia family gathered around their tree, the room filled with laughter, excitement, and the sound of wrapping paper being torn apart. It was the kind of morning every parent dreams of, a moment where everything feels perfect. Among the many gifts nestled beneath the tree, one stood out to their young daughter. It was brightly packaged and instantly recognizable, a Disney Frozen Elsa doll. At the time, Frozen was everywhere. The movie had taken the world by storm. Its catchy songs played in homes, schools, and car rides. Every little girl wanted to be Elsa, the Ice Queen who sang of letting go and embracing her power. The Madonia family was no different. Their daughter adored Elsa, so when she unwrapped the doll, her eyes lit up with joy. It was one of her favorite gifts that year, and she carried it everywhere. It wasn't just a toy. It was a little piece of magic brought to life in her hands. The doll itself was simple, yet mesmerizing. When you pressed the button on its necklace, Elsa would sing a short clip of Let It Go or recite lines from the movie in her signature voice. It was the perfect blend of technology and charm designed to make kids smile, and for 2 years, that's exactly what it did. Nothing more, nothing less. doll became a staple in the Madonia household, a familiar presence during playtime and bedtime alike. It was just a toy, one of countless Elsa dolls made that year, nothing unusual, nothing remarkable, until 2015. In 2015, subtle changes began to creep in. At first, they were easy to ignore, small random things that could be chalked up to coincidence or a malfunction. But over time, those changes became impossible to dismiss. Without warning, the doll's behavior began to shift. It would sing or speak at random times, even when no one was near it. The family thought maybe the button was getting stuck, or perhaps it was just an electrical glitch. But the changes didn't stop there. Elsa, who had only ever spoken in English, started alternating between English and Spanish. This wasn't a feature the family was aware of, and there was no visible switch to change languages. The doll seemed to decide on its own when to speak English and when to speak Spanish. Strangely enough, they never touched the doll's batteries, not once in the 2 years since they'd unwrapped it. Yet, it kept working perfectly. In fact, it worked too well. At times, it would start singing out of nowhere, even when the power switch was turned off. The Madonia family brushed it off. Maybe the doll was malfunctioning, they thought. Maybe it was just old electronics acting up. After all, it was still just a toy, right? But the family couldn't have known that these little glitches were only the beginning. Something far stranger, something far more disturbing was just around the corner. It all started so subtly that the family didn't think much of it at first. One day, out of nowhere, the doll, who had always sung in English, began switching between English and Spanish. There was no warning, no explanation. It just happened. They assumed it might be a feature they hadn't noticed before. After all, toys these days are full of surprises. Maybe this Elsa doll was bilingual. But then they looked closer. There was no switch, no setting to toggle languages. There was only one button, the one that activated the sounds. The family didn't dwell on it. Maybe it was just a harmless glitch, something to laugh about and move on. They kept the doll, and for a while, life continued as normal. But as the weeks went by, they began to notice more changes they couldn't explain. Elsa began speaking and singing at odd times, even when no one was near her. She'd sit on a shelf, quiet for hours, then suddenly break into song. At first, the family thought the button might be getting stuck, an issue with the mechanism, but the real problem was that it happened when the power switch was turned off. Imagine sitting in a quiet house late at night, the kids all already asleep, and suddenly hearing the unmistakable voice of Elsa coming from the next room. At first, it was startling. Then it became disturbing. The doll didn't just sing or speak randomly. It felt deliberate, almost as if it knew when to make its presence known. Even stranger, the family realized they had never replaced the doll's batteries, not once in all the years they'd owned it. Yet, it worked flawlessly. How could that be? It wasn't possible. And yet, there she was, singing, speaking, and switching between languages as if she had a mind of her own. The doll's behavior became so consistent, so disturbing, that it started to feel as though it was no longer a harmless toy. The family tried to rationalize it. Maybe the wiring was faulty. Maybe it was responding to vibrations or stray signals. But deep down, they began to feel uneasy in its presence. It wasn't just the strange sounds or the unexplained language changes. It was something else, something harder to define, an almost tangible sense of wrongness. Like the doll wasn't just malfunctioning, it was watching, waiting, and choosing the moments it would come to life. As the months went on, the family found themselves growing increasingly disturbed. The doll seemed to defy logic, its behavior escalating little by little. It was as if it wanted them to notice, as if it wanted their attention. And yet, this was only the beginning. The Madonia family didn't know it yet, but Elsa wasn't going to stop. What started as a toy with a glitch would soon become something much harder to explain and even harder to escape. By late 2019, the Madonia family had reached their limit. For years, the Elsa doll had been a source of puzzlement, frustration, and growing unease. It seemed like no matter what they did, it wouldn't stop behaving strangely. They could no longer chalk it up to a harmless glitch. It had become something far more disturbing. They decided it was time to put an end to it. One day, they placed the doll in a plastic trash bag, tied it tightly, and tossed it into their outdoor garbage bin. It felt like a weight had been lifted. Surely, this was it. The doll would be picked up with the weekly trash, hauled away to a landfill, and forgotten. The nightmare was finally over. Or so they thought. It wasn't until weeks later, during an ordinary day, that they discovered something that would leave them shaken. As they went about their routine, one of them opened a storage bench in the living room, a bench used for keeping blankets and pillows, and there it was. The Elsa doll, the very same one they had thrown away, was sitting there as if it had never left. Its bright, frozen smile stared back at them, its dress still pristine, its button ready to be pressed. At first, they were too stunned to react. How could it be here? Had someone pulled it out of the trash? Was this some kind of prank? They questioned everyone in the family. The children, wide-eyed and insistent, denied ever retrieving the doll. They hadn't even gone near the trash bin, they said, and their parents believed them. Why would they dig through the garbage for a toy they barely played with anymore? Still, the question remained. How did it get there? Who or what had brought it back? The family searched for logical explanations. Maybe someone had seen the doll in the trash and decided to return it as a kind gesture. Maybe one of the kids had grabbed it and simply didn't want to admit it. But deep down, they knew the truth. The doll's presence felt deliberate. It hadn't just been returned, it had been placed inside the bench neatly, almost as if it was waiting for them to find it. The discovery left the family on edge. Was it just a strange coincidence? Or was there something more to this doll than they were willing to admit? For the Madonias, this wasn't just an odd occurrence. It felt like a warning, a sign that no matter how hard they tried, Elsa wasn't going to leave them that easily. The family began to question everything. What was happening? Was this a joke, a trick, or something much more threatening? they tried to reassure themselves. Maybe they were overthinking it. Maybe there was a logical explanation they just hadn't found yet. But deep down, they knew the doll wasn't finished with them. And in the weeks that followed, it would only get worse. After the first unsettling discovery, the Madonia family decided they needed to take drastic measures. The doll's unexpected return had shaken them, but they were determined to get rid of it. For good this time. They weren't taking any chances. This time, they double-bagged Elsa in thick, heavy garbage bags, ensuring there was no way she could get out. They tied the knots as tightly as they could, testing them to make sure nothing would come undone. Then they placed the doll at the very bottom of their trash can, beneath layers of other waste, making absolutely certain it wouldn't be easy to retrieve. They waited for garbage day, watching as the truck arrived and emptied the bin. The sound of the trash being crushed in the compactor brought them a sense of relief. It was over, they thought. Elsa was gone, crushed under the weight of tons of other garbage, far from their home and their lives. To put the whole ordeal behind them, the family decided to take a trip shortly after. They packed their bags, eager to escape the strange and unsettling events that had plagued them. Leaving their home gave them a sense of freedom, as if they were finally breaking free of Elsa's hold. As they drove away, they couldn't help but feel lighter, as though they were leaving the nightmare behind. But that feeling didn't last long. When they returned home days later, the first thing they noticed was how quiet everything seemed. The house stood exactly as they'd left it, undisturbed and ordinary. They began unpacking their bags, slipping back into their routine. For a moment, they believed everything was back to normal. Until someone glanced out the window into the backyard. Sitting there, in plain view, was Elsa. Her bright smile and sparkling dress seemed almost mocking, as though she knew they'd tried to get rid of her. She wasn't just back. She was waiting for them. The family stood frozen, staring at the doll through the window. How was this possible? They had seen her taken away, seen the trash collected and hauled off. There was no way she could have found her way back. And yet, here she was, this time not hidden, but out in the open, as if to make a point. They searched for answers. Had someone found the doll and brought it back as a prank? Was this some kind of cruel joke? But no one could have known. No one else had access to their backyard, and the doll was placed so deliberately, as though it had been waiting for their return. The disturbing discovery left them with more questions than answers. Each explanation seemed more impossible than the last. The family's sense of safety began to crumble. Was this doll really just a toy? Or was it something else entirely? Something they couldn't understand, something they couldn't escape. No matter how hard they tried to get rid of her, Elsa kept coming back. And deep down, the family began to fear that she always would. The Madonia family had tried everything. They'd thrown Elsa away, double-bagged her, and ensured she was collected with the trash. And yet, she kept coming back. It was as though the doll was determined to stay with them no matter how far they tried to push her away. By this point, they were desperate. The repeated appearances of the doll were not just unsettling. they were beginning to feel disturbing. Whatever this was, they knew one thing. They needed Elsa out of their lives for good. And so they came up with a plan that involved sending her far, far away. The family decided to mail Elsa to a trusted friend in Minnesota. This wasn't just a random choice. It was a deliberate move to send the doll hundreds of miles away, to a place she could never return from. They carefully packaged her up, ensuring she was completely secure in the box. The kids watched as their parents prepared the package, their faces a mixture of relief and lingering fear. It was a symbolic moment. Finally, they were taking control of this abnormal and terrifying situation. At the post office, they handed the package over to a clerk, who weighed it, labeled it, and sent it on its way. Watching the package disappear from sight brought a sense of closure, even if it was temporary. The family left the post office that day feeling lighter, as though they had finally broken free of Elsa's grip. The doll's journey didn't end there, though. When the package arrived in Minnesota, their family friend, let's call him Kevin, opened the box with curiosity. Inside, he found the infamous Elsa doll, still pristine, still smiling, as if nothing unusual had ever happened. Kevin, perhaps skeptical or maybe just amused, decided to take an unusual approach. He taped Elsa to the front bumper of his truck. To him, it might have been a quirky joke, something to laugh about with friends, but for the Madonia family, it was a way to ensure the doll was as far removed from their lives as possible. As far as the Madonia family knows, Elsa has stayed in Minnesota. She hasn't returned to Houston, and their lives have returned to some semblance of normalcy. But even now, they can't help but wonder, how did she come back to them in the first place? And why did she stop singing in English altogether? At some point, Elsa's once familiar English phrases had disappeared entirely. The doll only spoke and sang in Spanish, as though she had evolved, or perhaps regressed, into something unrecognizable. Was it a malfunction? A strange coincidence? Or was there something deeper at play? The questions remain unanswered. Did Elsa choose her own path back to the family, or was someone or something guiding her? And now, with Elsa far from Houston, another question lingers. Will she ever find her way back? Or will she remain head to that truck in Minnesota, a silent reminder of a mystery that defies explanation? Oh, one thing is certain, the Madonia family won't forget her, and neither will anyone else who hears this story. Sometimes, the scariest stories aren't from horror movies. They happen in real life. For the Madonia family, this wasn't just a toy. It became a mystery they couldn't solve, and an experience they'll never forget. If you threw away a doll and it kept coming back, what would you do?